Okay, we want to take a few seconds and talk about the differences in the language of attachment. Now, essentially, there's three different methods for assessing attachment, and one primarily in childhood up to about, well, basically between 9 months and 18 months is the strain situation, and that's the original attachment measure that was most well known by Mary Ainsworth, and we'll talk about that in just a second. And then the adult attachment interview, which is designed for basically 16-year-olds and above, and that's interview based. And then there's the self-report based of the ECR and the GAI. The ECR is experiences in close relationships. The GAI is the God attachment inventory. As you'll see, the strain situation is really looking at attachment as it's organized at the behavioral level, and it's based on real experiences that the child's had with the parent. And when the attachment was originally being studied by Mary Ainsworth, she wanted to see the link between how parents responded to their children's emotions and attachment behavior in early infancy. So the way they would do this is they send people into the home and observe the parent and how the parent responded to the child when the child was upset, or the child was tired or hungry or in a bad mood. How did the parent actually respond to the child? How sensitive was her responses to helping the child get calmed down? And the idea is that how the parent responded to the child in these situations would become encoded or internalized into a working model of experience. Now, a working model works like a cognitive schema that has built into it expectations for how things typically unfold, how things typically happen. And the idea with the strain situation is that the internal working model or the schema of attachment would only be activated in situations where the child was under some kind of emotional distress. Well, the way that Mary Ainsworth decided she could do this ethically was to create the strain situation, which is basically based on the idea that universally children between 9 months and 18 months become somewhat distressed when they are in strained situations, and especially when they have separation from their parent for even short durations. This creates some anxiety, and especially if the separation is when there's nobody with them or if there's a stranger, somebody they don't know. Right, this will activate attachment. Now, it's enough to activate the attachment system, but it doesn't typically overwhelm a child. So then, under that situation, the previous attachment experiences or the attachment working model will be activated, and then we can measure how the child behaves in that situation with the idea that that would be a reflection of the previous experiences the child's had with their attachment figure. So we already talked about what these different categories are and what they mean, but of course secure kids will be able to explore the room after initially getting oriented to it, and then when the parent is gone or leaves the room, then the child becomes upset, and when the parent comes back into the room, the child moves directly toward the parent with the expectation of being picked up and calmed down. The parent picks him up, the child melts into the parent, and then the child calms down and then is back off to exploration. Whereas the avoidant child moves away from the parent at reunion, and the resistant child essentially moves toward the parent but refuses to get calmed down. The disorganized child has a breakdown in the organized strategy. Whereas these three are all organized forms of attachment. Disorganized child, the strategy breaks down and it's not organized and goal-directed. And then the cannot classified child, which is different from disorganized, tend to change or switch strategies. So they exhibit both avoidant and resistant strategies within the same episode. Now, we can see with the adult attachment interview, we're looking at how is this attachment anxiety organized at the level of representation, or in terms of their ability to talk about and access memories, and especially autobiographical memory, and do so in a coherent way. Whereas the ECR and God attachment inventory, these are based not so much on the organization of autobiographical memory or the organization of behavior, but beliefs one has about others, self, emotions, and about whether other people are reliable and accessible and dependable in times of distress or not. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea about what this chart means, and to look at the similarities and differences between the different measures of attachment and the different language that they use to describe similar things. And just simply, for example, disorganized is at a behavioral level. It's referred to disorganized attachment. It tends to be referred to as unresolved with respect to loss, that's the L, or with abuse. And in the adult attachment interview, technically there is no disorganized or unresolved status in the ECR and the GAI, but there is a fearful avoidance, which is very similar. Well, they exhibit high anxiety and high avoidance, which is similar to the cannot classify here, where they change strategies throughout the interview, and they cannot classify in the strain situation here. So hopefully that clears up some of the language.